Hi everyone, and welcome to Financial Basics, where we make money grow with you. Today I want to be discussing Geoarbitrage, and I also want to be looking at a step-by-step guide on how to include this in your financial journey towards independence and retirement. So the things that I want to cover in this video is what is Geoarbitrage, the fact that you're already using Geoarbitrage to some extent, looking at domestic versus international Geoarbitrage, comparing apples to oranges, just looking at the math behind Geoarbitrage, particularly when you're comparing the costs or the living expenses between two cities, what personal sacrifices that might be involved if you are looking or going through Geoarbitrage or utilizing it. Just talking a bit about digital nomads and remote workers, and then what you can do to prepare for Geoarbitrage, and then the potential challenges and how to overcome them as well, and then utilizing Geoarbitrage in your financial independence journey, as well as just a few tips to get started with Geoarbitrage. So what is Geoarbitrage? Geoarbitrage is simply taking advantage of the fact that costs differ in different locations. So it's a strategy fundamentally of moving to a low cost area, either domestically or internationally, and to make money earned in a higher cost area. Basically, you're spending that in a low cost area. And this is extremely popular in the FIRE community because expenses are used as a benchmark for when you can retire. Ideally, you want 25 years of annual expenses saved before you can hit your retirement goal. And 25 years is 300 months worth of expenses. So reducing your expenses on a monthly basis by even £100, that would have an impact of up to £30,000 on your retirement goal. And you are already using Geoarbitrage in your day-to-day life. When you think about the process of buying or renting wherever you are now, you're probably taking things into consideration like cost, but also access to the things that you're interested in, also where your friends and your family is, where your work is. So just as an example, when I first moved to Manchester, I wanted to be within a couple of miles of cycle distance to my office, which was in city centre. So I literally drew a circle around where my work was and said, okay, I need to find a place within this circle. And that just made it a lot easier for me when I was looking for a place to initially stay when we arrived in the UK, to go, okay, this is probably where we want to be. And moving out of the city centre can have enormous cost benefits. For example, at the moment, you could probably get an apartment in city centre for maybe £1,400 a month. And if you could look at a bigger circle, look at within 30 minutes, for example, of city centre, you could probably get that down to somewhere between £700 and £900. And even if it was only £900, that would be a £500 difference. But that £500 is after tax. So even if you're on the lowest tax band, which is 20% in the UK, that £500 is actually equivalent to getting a raise of £625, if not more, if you take some of the other things that go off on your pay slips, right? Your NI, etc. So that would be £625 per month raise is what you would require to cover that £500 difference. And if you multiply that by 12, that's £7,500 a year that you're looking at saving or adding to your salary if you wanted to get a raise to meet that extra £500. And there's minimal associated costs with this type of geoarbitrage. So this is local geoarbitrage, where you're not going too far, you're going within 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe an hour outside of your core bubble, the core area where you're staying. And it's very, very likely that there are minimal changes to things like your safety, security, your internet connection speeds, or the access to the internet. Government services are going to be very similar. Hospital services are going to be similar. So all of these things are going to be very equivalent if you're only moving 30 minutes or an hour outside of that core city center. And it's still really easy to access your social circle, your friends, your family, access to work, so wherever the office is located, even if that is in city center. And then all of the other amenities, whatever you deem important to you, whether that be city life, whether that be pubs, whether that be bars, whether that be, whatever that is, whether it's sporting activities or sporting events, then all of these things are still within reasonable access. You're not going too far away from the city center where you're losing immediate or short access to a lot of those things. And then there are a couple of clear advantages to just moving away from the city center. It's less busy and there's less traffic. There's more public spaces. There's probably cheaper grocery shopping. There's lower crime rates, less litter. It's just cleaner, quieter. And then it's probably also a little bit more peaceful. You're probably in a neighborhood that's more suburban, more rural, where you're not worried about everything just being stacked up on top of each other. So there's a great tool online, and I will share that in a link in the description below. But what this tool does is it looks at public transport, or even driving in, and it looks at where are the locations, and you can set it yourself, but I looked at locations within an hour transport to Manchester city centre, for example. I've got a couple other ones here. That's also London on the other side, and on the next slide I'll be doing a couple in the US. But you can see there that there's a spread from the city centre that goes sort of outwards in all directions, and then there's also a couple of dots along that map, and that represents potentially a train station or some other way that allows you easy access into the city centre, still within an hour of leaving the house or leaving your location. And this is a great tool for getting a high level perspective on where your work might be, where your social circle might be, whatever it is that you deem important to you. And you can just choose that specific location. It doesn't have to be a city center. And you can say, okay, I want to live within 30 minutes of that location or an hour of that location. It'll give you the options based off of that. So yeah, we've got San Jose, and we've got Houston as well, showing again just that spread within an hour's public transport or driving of city center. But again, you can choose different locations just depending on your requirements. And you can see those dots as well around each location where you've potentially got a train station or something else that'll give you that immediate access into the city center. So domestic geoarbitrage is a little bit different to local geoarbitrage, which is why I sort of distinguished the two. But this is fundamentally moving city. So this is looking at, you're currently in New York or some high cost of living area, whether it be London, New York, Washington, wherever, one of these big cities, and you're just moving to a completely different city within the same country though. So you could potentially cut your expenses quite dramatically actually in a lot of places without needing to leave the familiar culture, the language, the lifestyle. So the advantages here could clearly be housing costs, which is probably one of the biggest factors, But certainly insurance could be be a factor, transportation. You could be in the US, you get different taxes depending on the state that you're in. So moving from California to Texas, for example, there could be tax advantages as well. Your shopping, your groceries could be a lot lower if you're in a different city. And even things like childcare could be a lot cheaper depending on where you're actually living. For just a couple of examples, moving San Francisco to a city in the Midwest, New York to a low cost area in the South, or even London to Manchester. There are a couple of drawbacks though, once you start moving further away, so a completely different city. There might be less access to certain career opportunities. There might be cultural adjustments. It might not be as drastic as moving internationally, but certainly there might be a few things that are different that you might need to just make that adjustment. In a smaller city, sometimes you can have fewer amenities or entertainment options, so it's not that big city life. If you're craving that, then just take that into consideration for a move like this. And one of the biggest ones, at least for me personally, that I had to deal with when I moved from South Africa to the UK was moving away from your social circle and the personal support structures that potentially you've built up over decades. And the advice that I would give is research cost of living. Take a look at your indexes. There's indexes and they're available. A lot of them are available online. You can actually get a real good grasp on what that difference is in price. Consider taxes, consider climate preferences, which a lot of people don't worry too much about depending on the circumstances. But yeah, for these types of things, you're going to be away from family, away from your social structures, and I would say those are probably the biggest drawbacks at this point when moving even in your own country, but just to a different city. You're going to be further away from some of the things that might be important to you. And there's some great resource for this. If you're not sure what you think should be important, or you want to build a list of like criteria, and if you're deciding between multiple cities, MarketWatch and the Earthawaits has some great resources on that. And I will include those links again in the description. Just a couple of examples here. What is the population, money and work? What is the median rent? What is the temperatures? What is the humidity? What sort of health facilities there are? Are there outdoor activities, fun stuff? And then a couple of things that I didn't see on that list was like internet speeds, different taxes, air quality, pollution potentially is something that you can consider. What is the crime rates? What is the lifestyle, right? So these are things that you can just think about before making a move, even domestically. International geoarbitrage can a lot of the time provide even more cost savings than potentially the domestic one. So this is a much larger step, and particularly if you are in the United States or in Western Europe, you're going to save a lot of money by looking at other countries. Mexico, Portugal, Spain, Greece, Italy, Thailand, Colombia, Malaysia. All of these countries are fantastic options to take into consideration when deciding if you want to do international geoarbitrage or if you want to retire in some way. And the benefits for doing that, obviously there's a lower cost of living, but you could also increase the quality of your life for the same or less money. There are obviously huge tax advantages potentially, and it is a life-changing experience to go and explore another culture and another society and how they run, how they operate, how they live. Is just going there and experiencing that is something amazing and something quite unique. There are potential drawbacks as well, so you have to cover that. Language barriers, a lot of the time if you're moving from one country to the next, unless you're in the British Empire where a lot of people speak English, or the French Empire where a lot speak, or the old French empires where a lot of people spoke French, something along those lines, then you're very high chance the place that you're going to, the language might be different, so you just need to adjust to that. There might also be different legal systems and different healthcare systems, so you need to take that into consideration. And then of course the big one, at least for me again, is just distance from family. So you are very isolated and you have to almost rebuild that social network, that social infrastructure that you had when you left your country of origin. So tips for choosing a location, or at least things to look out for me, healthcare is extremely important. What are the actual visa requirements? And you can actually spend some time looking at not just visa requirements, but what visas are actually available to you. So a lot of countries, particularly the ones that are targets or ideal spots for geoarbitrage, a lot of them have specific visas set up either for people that are retiring or have retired already, and they have this passive income, or even people that want to move on a more temporary basis for a year. If you're a remote worker or anything along those lines where you continue to work but your income is coming from another country, then they have visas specifically capable of managing those types of situations. And the other things I would look for is just amenities to match your life and your lifestyle. So you want to make sure, if you really enjoy, cricket or soccer or whatever it is that you really enjoy on a day-to-day basis, or your hobbies, make sure that you can bring those across with you. Make sure that those communities exist in the new location. And then also just make sure you have reliable internet, because that's probably going to be a big part of that move. You want to make sure that you're still connected in some way to your previous home, your previous location. So comparing apples to oranges, right? So what I'm talking about here is just comparing two different cities, or even across two different countries where you're going, I'm here and I want to live at this place. So what you can do, and there's a lot of websites that give a whole bunch of information on this topic, but you can look at average cost of living in specific cities. So the example I gave here is just London and Manchester. So let's say the average cost of living in London was 4,000, and the average cost of living in Manchester was, let's say, 2,500, right? So you want to make that comparison, but obviously you're not going to be average. You're either going to be over by a certain amount or under by a certain amount. So how do you deal with that in this calculation? So the first thing you can probably do is actually go do research on those variables and dig into how much you think your costs are actually going to change. So instead of just estimating it, you could actually dig in and go look at how much rent is going to be for what you're looking for specifically in Manchester. But another way to do it, if all you have is just those averages, is you can say, okay, let's say in London your actual expenses was 4,500 instead of the 4,000. So you can then multiply that out and you can say, well, based off of that, I am actually living at 113% of what an average person lives in London. And if I were to do the equivalent in Manchester, live at the same rate, the same proportion, 113%, i.e. 13% above an average person in Manchester as compared to 13% above an average person in London, you can then work out the Manchester equivalent of that, and that would be £2,812.50 in this specific example. If you're living below below the average, you can also do the exact same calculation. So here, for example, even though the average person in London lives on 4,000, you're comparing that 4,000, you're benchmarking it against your personal expenses to customize it to you specifically. So you can see here, you're living on 3,200, so you're on 80% of an average Londoner. And if you were to do that equivalently in Manchester, you would live on 80% of the 2,500, which comes out as 2,000. I've also just included the formulas there as well. Really easy, you're just comparing the ratios. The other thing to take into consideration is just pre and post tax. So here I've just extended those same formula where I'm including the tax rate. And what that does is it looks at your savings, how much you are expected to be saving every month, and then multiplying that out to give you a equivalent to what your raise should have been. And what I mean by that is how much extra do you need to earn to live in that city with an equivalent lifestyle. So here, for example, between the average in London, the average in Manchester, and here your actual expenses being 3,200, so you're living 80%, but you're living below an average Londoner, you're saving 1,200, but if you were on the lowest tax bracket, which is 20%, your pre-tax conversion factor in this situation is 1.25. So that 1,200 is actually worth, in terms of earnings, if you were to go get a job, it would need to be 1,500 higher. So that's the 18,000 if you do that over a 12-month period. And then just a note here, Geoarbitrage is absolutely ideal and fantastic for anybody that's doing digital nomad type lifestyle, or is freelancing, or is doing any sort of online business where you don't need to be face to face with your customer, because you can do that from anywhere in the world today with the way internet is set up. And it just opens the possibility to live in a low cost country while earning from a high cost country or high value currency. And the key things here: set up a reliable internet connection and try and establish a remote working routine. And you can actually start building that routine even while you are in your current location. And then just research time zones as well. You don't necessarily want to move right to the opposite side of the planet if you're still engaging with customers, albeit remotely, where there might be a 12-hour or 10-hour time delay or 10-hour time difference, where you potentially need to reach out to customers at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. The other thing to take into consideration is obviously tax residency. So you might want to set up a particular home base or one base of operations in a country where you can say, okay, I'm a tax resident, where you're not constantly changing your residency on a year-to-year basis. In terms of preparing for Geoarbitrage, the things you want to be doing is you want to make sure you have a stable income source. Ideally, it's a passive income source or a remote income source, just to support you in that low-cost location. From a legal perspective, you want to make sure that you have access via either a visa or you're checking residency requirements, especially if you plan to stay there for a long period of time. So if this is generally more than either 6 months or 12 months or even beyond that, then you want to make sure that you have a plan on how to do that. It's worth noting here, a lot of the visas that are specifically orientated towards remote workers of this type, they have an automatic renewal, or they have some sort of renewal process where if you stick to that visa and you renew it for X number of years, then you can actually convert that into a citizenship or a permanent residency. And also just consider the implications of moving on your taxes and your health insurance as well. And if necessary, also from the health insurance perspective, you might want to take out specific private health insurance just to deal with the potential risk of being in a low-cost country where you're not dependent on the public or the available public healthcare or the available healthcare resources. So the things that you want to look for here, just in terms of preparing before you actually make the move, is obviously your housing options. So just look at short-term rentals or potentially longer leases. Personally, I wouldn't take out a lease more than 12 months, and I certainly wouldn't buy when I was moving to a new place. I would want to be there, assess the situation, look at some of the areas in person, decide where I want to stay at that point. Making a big investment without physically checking it out and without being there in person is probably something that you might not want to do. Identify the reliable healthcare providers that are local. Prepare for any cultural differences or even language differences. So get on to Duolingo or any of the apps where you could learn at least the basics of the language, and potentially even figure out if you can speak to locals or speak to people from that country and start practicing the language as well. And the other thing I want to emphasize here, it's in addition to your normal emergency fund, I would also consider starting to build up a separate fund that's specifically focused on any unexpected costs while adjusting to the new place, as well as if there's any sort of emergency back home or with your family or friends, or even a wedding, just something that you need to physically be at that location, you might want to set up an additional fund just to deal with those types of situations. So as I mentioned, the local language could be different. There could be cultural norms that you might need to adhere to or just understand them. Access to social support is obviously, it can be extremely isolating. And the solution here, or the solution that has worked for me at least, moving to the UK, has been joining communities, joining expat communities, joining local clubs, joining anything orientated towards social interactions where you are meeting people and meeting locals and interacting with them on a regular basis, doing things that you and those people together enjoy. And then adjusting to the new healthcare, the legal systems, the tax systems. So do some research on that. And as I mentioned, if necessary, even purchase international health insurance for while you're in that country. So there's a couple of different types of geoarbitrage. So there's like a temporary one where you could potentially just move to a new country. And I know some people that have done this. They move to a new country for 6 months or 12 months or even a little bit longer, 2 years, where they have a specific goal in mind. So for example, fresh out of university, I've accumulated some student debt or some university loans where I want to pay that off. I've done the calculation and I can move to and go teach English in Korea, for example, where I could get my cost down. I would be able to save a portion of my salary in that location. And I could do that for the next year, and I would be able to clear those student loans. So that's something that you can absolutely do. It's also a great way to just test the waters, see how you feel in the new location, start making those decisions, give yourself time to make those decisions on whether you actually want to stay there on a more permanent basis. The next one is permanent geoarbitrage, which is moving to that country on a permanent basis where you're looking at a lower cost and you're looking for that long-term lifestyle, you're looking for something where you could actually stay there for multiple years, 5, 6, even for the rest of your life potentially. And then there's travel-based geo-arbitrage, which is really moving between different countries every couple of months. So you're just constantly traveling, and what you can actually find is even constant traveling, if you pick your locations quite carefully and you pick where you're going and what you're doing, you can actually keep those costs quite reasonable. And a lot of people that I've engaged with have found that using this approach, their costs are actually still lower than what they would have been if they stayed in either London or New York or wherever it is. So there's an enormous cost saving there, even with the travel type lifestyle. It doesn't have to be permanent. Geoarbitrage, it can be really flexible. And I think this just emphasizes that, where you get to pick and choose what type of geoarbitrage you want to do, and utilizing it either to a more extreme or less extreme sort of level to decide how much you want to take on. So the example that I want to give you, which I think is quite unique, is a person that wants to utilize geoarbitrage in their FIRE journey, so in their financial independence retirement early journey, and instead of diving in and going for a 4% withdrawal rate, they want to retire a little bit earlier with a 1% withdrawal rate, which allows their capital to continue to grow above the rate of inflation. So what they could do is, in the first year of retirement, have a 1% withdrawal rate, second year of retirement a 2% withdrawal rate, and so on, moving up gradually to the 4% withdrawal rate. And if you did this, and we can just run an example here, I've included the formulas there as well, but let's say you're getting an 8.5% growth rate after inflation in the market on your investments. And year one, you start with a 1.2 million portfolio, then you can withdraw at 1%, 12,000. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you use geoarbitrage and you're looking at places like Thailand, you could probably get away with living quite a good lifestyle for 12,000 in that year if you're a single person. And what that means is your investments can continue to grow, and you can see there at 2% you could move up to 25,000. And what you could potentially do is find a location that matches those expenses. So after the first year, you've been in Thailand, year two comes around, okay, I'm going to double my withdrawal rate, I'm going to aim for 25,000 instead of the 24, adjusting your 4% with inflation. So now you can go out there and find a new location to live that'll match that 25,000. In the third year, you can aim for 3%. In the fourth year, 4%, and you can gradually step up your lifestyle and your location over a 4-5 year period, which really gives that capital a chance to grow. And the last years of your retirement are the most valuable. The last years as you go into retirement are the most valuable in terms of adding to your actual capital. So it's a great way to just grow that pool before you fully retire without taking that 4% hit right off the bat. So just a couple of tips for getting started with geoarbitrage. Start small, try a short-term stay, consider Airbnb, short-term lease to see if you enjoy the lifestyle in that location, and be flexible, be willing to try multiple locations, try different things. Calculate your target costs of living to determine which place will align with your financial goals. And again, there's great resources that give example locations based off of a budget, and I'm going to include that link as well in the description below. And then look into expat resources as well, or forums, or even Facebook, where there are groups of these people living in those locations who have done these things already. So if you're thinking about Thailand, go find those communities where people are doing this. If you're thinking about Spain, do the same. Each location that you're probably thinking of is going to have a community already doing this, already been there. They've walked this path, and you can learn a lot without having to do a lot, just by looking at and speaking to and engaging with that community in those communities. In summary, Geoarbitrage is a tool just to reduce your expenses at any point along the journey to financial independence and retirement. The key takeaway for me with regards to utilizing it is that there is a 300 times advantage in terms of reducing your monthly expenses. So anything that you can save day to day, month to month to reduce your expenses has an enormous impact on how much you actually need, which means you can potentially hit your retirement goal a lot sooner. And consider utilizing Geoarbitrage domestically, internationally, as a way to reach your financial goals. It's a great tool just to move further along in that journey. And then the question I have is, where are you now in this financial journey? And if you are looking at using Geoarbitrage, what locations are you looking at and why those locations? Please feel free to comment below. And if you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like it, subscribe it, and share it. It helps immensely to support the channel. If you have any questions or requests, please also email me at financialbasicsabc@gmail.com. and subscribe so that you don't miss our next topic, which is going to be about FIRE for couples, achieving financial independence together. We're going to look at FIRE goals. We're going to look at navigating potential disagreements, optimizing combined incomes, looking at joint budgets, and managing shared expenses. See you next time. Goodbye.